On this episode of the After the Timeout podcast, in partnership with the Illinois Basketball Coaches Association, we welcome Nick LoGalbo, head boys basketball coach at Lane Tech and USA basketball coach. We talked to Coach LoGalbo about winning internationally in 3-on-3, maintaining success in your high school program for years, coaching in the city of Chicago, and much more. As always, thank you for listening to the After the Timeout podcast.
Let's do it.
All right, so we start every segment with the opening tip. So we wanted to talk to you about, you at Lane Tech, right? You graduated from there, went off to Benedictine, went back to Lane Tech, and you've never left. Okay, so we want to talk about, kind of what made you return there, what made you stay all this time. Obviously, what's so special about Lane?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first part of it is actually kind of funny. I don't think it was ever really my plan. I know some people probably, I know a lot of my buddies and people have joked about that, but when I left Lane and I graduated as a student, I kind of thought that was it. I always cared about it. I knew Lane was special and it helped me develop into the man that I was becoming. But when I went to Benedictine and I was playing, I knew I wanted to teach and coach. And actually, I was supposed to do my student teaching at Downers Grove. And I already reached out to the coaching staff there and was kind of getting all set to start helping out there. And then it was just kind of a random deal where one of my old assistant coaches became the head coach, and he called me and wanted me to be the head freshman coach, varsity assistant. I'm like, I would love to, but I'm not going to be able to commute for Downers Grove to Lane every day. So in Benedictine, Todd, you probably remember, had like a rule against student teaching at your alma mater.
Yeah,
but
sure.
It kind of worked out where our principal kind of wrote a letter on my behalf to Benedictine saying that we're looking to hire Nick full time. And so I ended up student teaching at Lane. I was doing a 6 a.m. practice in the morning for the freshmen, a varsity practice after school at 3:15. And then it was just like, man, fast forward 2.5 years, the head coach who hired me became the dean, and the job was open. And the AD and I had a previous relationship, and he hired me as the head coach at 25, and was not ready. But, I think it just became a labor of love all these years. I think there's some kind of cool about being at a place and seeing it kind of at a certain point and trying to just sink your hooks into it and try to make it something special. Lane's always been special. We've just kind of getting the program to another level. So that's kind of the deal. I've been there for 18 years now. Met my wife there. My kids right now are in the neighborhood, and we see them going to school there if all things stay the way they are. So it's just a special place to me. And I think we always say in our program, don't take special for granted. So I try not to do that. I think we've got a good thing going, so why complicate that? So.
Perfect transition. Then give us a little bit about your program. What's going on this year. Just fill our listeners in on your program in general and how your year's going.
Yeah, program in general. I think, as I said, when I took over, the program wasn't. I know when I played there, I'll be honest, we weren't super competitive. We weren't really on the map, if you kind of want to say that. And I think in the past 6 or 7 years, we've really gotten to a pretty cool place where we finally got ranked in the top 25 back in 2018, 2019 for the first time in over 20 years. We cracked that ranking. We've beaten some teams that are I think on that tier that we want to be at, and that high level tier. And I think we're scraping and clawing to get there. I think we've earned a lot of programs respect. We've been invited to some of the bigger events in our state. And now we're at a place where we want to continue to sustain that, but build on it. I think I think everyone says it, but I think we're in the toughest sectional. We're in 4A. We're the biggest class, but we're a high academic school, right? So we don't get to recruit like a lot of the schools do. We kind of deal with what we get. And so skill development's a huge priority for us. And I've taken a lot of pride in being a program that can compete in the public league against some of the top teams in the public league with really, we've had at best some D3, maybe a D2 guy here and there. We have the first guy who's gotten a Division I offer since I've been there in 18 years this year with the junior Shahid Salibo. He's starting to get some attention. But as far as this season goes, we're extremely young. This is the youngest team I've ever coached in 18 years. We have 5 sophomores up on varsity, starting a sophomore and 3 juniors. So we're we've lost 3 games in the final minute, 2 games on buzzer beaters, you know. So we're trying to figure it out and learn how to win and building chemistry. And as you know, you learn so much more from a loss. So we're trying to take it in stride and just one day, win the day one day at a time. So that's where we're at right now.
So I wanted to follow up on something you said. So I became a head coach at 29 myself, and I know exactly what you mean by when you kind of halfway joked, halfway not, that you weren't ready at 25. What were some of the things that when you became a head coach, you're like, wow, this is something I got to do too?
Yeah, there's so much of it, John. Like I remember, well, truthfully, I'll tell you this too. Within the same talk about transformational and like life changing. Like, I mean, I wouldn't have it any other way, but I mean, the previous head coach became the dean in like the first week of October. So the season starts in a month, right? And in that same week, I started grad school to get my master's in school leadership for my Type 75 in a cohort through Concordia University. And I started dating my now wife, right? So like literally, I went from being single and being an assistant and not being in grad school to all like in the same exact time being the head coach with all the responsibility a month out of the season, starting grad school, which is, it was a grind. And then obviously trying to swoon my now wife and keep her interested, So it was transformational. Man, there was so much that you just, as an assistant coach, it's, hey, we're helping with game plans and scouting. We're pouring into guys at practice. We get to be the good cop. We get to, to help guys with player development, all the things. I mean, the stuff about basketball, it's basketball, right? It's mostly basketball. It's not scheduling and practice planning and booster club and all the nonsense. And the CPS, there's a lot of nonsense that you got to kind of deal with. So it was a lot, man. I'm not gonna lie to you. Transformational for sure.
Yeah, that's a lot in 1 week. If you would have bought a house, I think you would have just hit them all at the same time, Coach.
Right.
So we wanted to really talk about USA basketball for a little bit with you, and you're obviously very heavily involved with USA basketball. But before we kind of get into some of the 3-on-3 and some of the specific aspects, maybe just talk about your journey with USA basketball, kind of how you got started, and then your definitely your connection with Don Showalter.
Yeah. Well, that's where it starts. I think just like all of us, and I pinch myself every time you say USA basketball. I think it's, I think all of us, I was 9 years old in that dream team in '92. And I remember collecting all the cups from McDonald's and going through the drive-through like all of us and getting the jerseys and waking up and watching the games. I have them all on DVDs behind me, and it changed my life. I remember, being an inner city Chicago kid. Jordan was my hero. Jordan was the GOAT. Coach K went to St. Helens, which is the same school I went to. And even at 9 years old, I knew that. And he was an assistant on that team. And I think that's really, when you talk, like basketball is a big part of my life already at 9. But at that point, I just remember that summer, it all changing. Like getting to see the way the game impacted the world and getting to watch just the world get swept up by the dream team and what they were able to do. So from that point forward, it was just literally, I knew USA basketball was the gold standard, was the pinnacle. And anytime I got a chance to watch them or the Olympics or whatever, I was all in. And then I remember in 2004, after that, that Olympic team with Iverson and all those guys, they kind of had that rough start and they lost to Puerto Rico. I remember watching it and like, man, what's going on? And they rebranded everything. They brought in Colangelo and Coach K. And I remember I was just a junkie. And I had been working the Duke camp already for several years. And just anything I could do, I'll do the laundry. I just want to be involved. Anything I could do to ever serve our country through the game that I love. It was like, no doubt. And I remember it was funny, man. I just got a text from a coach who's watching like a Vivian Stringer DVD from like 2010. And there's a screenshot of me. It was at the Wisconsin Dells, and I'm in the front row taking notes. He's like, always a student. My buddy was busting my chops, but it was at that clinic that I remember seeing Coach Showalter for the first time. He had just won his first gold medal at USAB, and he was a 600 plus win high school coach in Iowa. And I'll never forget it. He was the first speaker that morning, and we're at Wisconsin Dells, and he started his clinic by introducing his wife, who was in the front row, and his grandkids that were sitting there. And he talked about how they were going to the water parks afterwards. And I'll never forget it. And I was a young coach at the time. I was a new head coach at that time. And I had a lot of people in my ear telling me that like family and coaching didn't mix. I was about to be married myself. And I was honestly, I was searching for coaches that did it the way that I wanted to do it, right? Like who were being successful, but also being family men who also were able to find that balance. And Coach Show did that, and I was hooked. You know how like when you go to those clinics back in the day, the Nike clinics, when it's like a big, and it's Cal, like all the coaches bum rush him like he's like, you know, the Beatles, and they're asking for autographs and pictures. And nothing, Coach Show gets that now. But at that point in time, he was still, I mean, he's a high school coach. Some of the coaches didn't really, he wasn't like the headline. I mean, I darted down there and I was the first guy to see him. And I just told him how much his presentation meant, even beside basketball. And we just got to talking, and he invited me to work his Snow Valley basketball school in Iowa. And I was all in. The next year, we brought about 6 or 7 players down. By the following summer, we had 25 guys from Lane Tech going down his camp at Snow Valley. And I had started working it. And he and I just, our relationship blossomed, you know. And then sorry, it's a long-winded story, but with the USAB stuff, it was kind of a tragic thing, and talked about this before, but my cousin was shot in inner city Chicago. He was shot through the head and through the spine, and it was a very traumatic experience. And I just got to thinking, like, how can I turn a negative into positive and advocate for our kids in our city? And so I started like thinking about ideas of doing like free youth clinics through the park districts and 3-on-3 tournaments, which still 3-on-3 with USAB wasn't a thing yet, right? It was just starting to be a thing. And I started reaching out to people at Snow Valley, and Coach Show put me in touch with a guy named Matt King, who's now doing other stuff, but he was in coaching for a while, and got in touch with Jay Demings, who's the youth development director, but he now is also the 3-on-3 director. And he and I just got to talking, and that's kind of how that relationship started. And then over the years with USAB, it was just service. It was whatever they asked me to do, youth clinics, putting together events, putting on 3-on-3 tournaments in Chicago and throughout the Midwest, just putting on events to help them and whatever they needed. We hosted one of the coaching academies at Lane. I was able to speak at that with Coach Collins, and like, I mean, come on, like it was unbelievable, you know. And but then over the years, just more and more opportunities presented themselves on the 3-on-3 side and also on the 5-on-5 side. So I think that's kind of how it started. Feel like that was long-winded. I'm going to pump the brakes there, and if there's other stuff we want to talk about with that, I'd be happy to kind of jump in.
Well, let's kind of get into the nuts and bolts. First off, congratulations on the 3-on-3 Coach of the Year. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
And you know, obviously, you're recently at the tournament out there, and you know, you're going to experience that. But let's talk about how we can, as coaches, implement that more into practice and how it develops the game. You know, with skill development and tactical stuff. You'll kind of give us a little insight into how coaches can maybe put that in and help it develop their program.
Yeah, Todd, I love it. And you know, it's funny because that's kind of how it all started for me. Like, I remember thinking like we do so much 3-on-3 breakdown stuff as it is. So when I started really coaching the 3-on-3 stuff, I remember like I was doing a lot of like events and helping put on 3-on-3 tournaments. And I would get some of my like lane guys and neighborhood guys to play in these tournaments and just give them a little bit things like little quick hitters and sets here and there. But like what we started learning really quick was like, just like back in the day, man, when you're playing at the park, like defensively, you cannot hide. You got to guard your yard. You know what I mean? You can't take plays off. You've got to understand like it's you and the guy, you know, the guy you're guarding, and you've got to make multiple efforts to defend. That's the thing we love. We do 3-on-3 in the off season now, in fall and the spring. Like when we do open gyms, we do 3-on-3 tournaments sometimes and just let guys play. You know what I mean? But in the season, 3-on-3 breakdowns gets really competitive, right? So like you could be teaching a quick hitter or a set, but conversely, you're watching guys who can guard their yard, who understand rotations, who understand X and out if they make a skip pass and things like that. But ultimately, what I started finding was watching these events was like, you see who your dogs are, you see who your competitors are too, you know. So it's like when you're trying to really get a team to gel, I think it's a great time. We throw in 3-on-3 tournaments now in practice at times, you know, like last 15 minutes of practice. All right, break up, figure out your squads, let's compete. You know what I mean? And go at it. So those are a few things. Some other things I'll never forget. Prior to my first like head coaching assignment with the 3-on-3 side, it was right before COVID hit, and they were doing, it was All-Star Weekend, right? So I mean, we're literally 2 weeks before COVID hit, and All-Star Weekend in Chicago. And Jay called me up and said, "Look, we're doing the Olympic trials, right? So the men's and women's team that they wanted to kind of select to compete for the Olympic run in it was 2020, but it became 2021. They're like, we're doing in Chicago All-Star Weekend. And we were hoping, because Kara Lawson, who's at Duke, was the women's coach, and a guy named Joe Lewandowski was the men's coach. And Kara was working with the Boston Celtics at the time, so she was going to be a day late. Joe is a college coach in his own right. He was going to be a little late. They asked me to kind of put the teams through practices and through workouts for the first couple of days. And then ultimately, when Joe and Kara got there, they wanted to watch the team. So I was running the show. I was running the practices. And we're talking Kelsey Plum, and we're talking, I mean, we're talking some elite level players on both sides of the ball. And I was a little like shell shocked. I'm like, yo, I've done this with my teams, but I've never like put together a full intense practice for professional athletes like this. So, but what I found there, and what gave me a lot of confidence when I became the head coach, was that we're not reinventing the wheel, right? Like, they want to be taught, they want to be coached, they want to be built up, they want to have things that are going to help them be successful to win. And that's what it really came down to. We gave them some competitive drills, we gave them some breakdowns, we gave them some, and I talked to Joe and Kara too about what are some of the sets they want to see run, and that was it. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, I think translation to the 5-on-5, defensively, you can't hide. You're going to get some great sets. A lot of our sets anyway are 3-man breakdown anyway, right? And you get to like the weak side drift and kick and one more stuff. So you put those guys on the weak side anyway, right? So you're working through your ball screens, your main actions. And then, so that's stuff that translates. And then obviously the competitiveness. So I think I just rattled a little bit. Sorry about that.
No, I mean, this is the stuff we want to hear, Coach. This is why we're here. So no worries. All right, so we wanted to kind of get into your experience a little bit as an athletic director. I know you're not the athletic director anymore, but I think you have a very unique perspective, and the first part will be a little bit more vague, and the second part will be a little bit more specific. But the first part is, I'm just fascinated to know, what's it like to be an athletic director of a school with 4,000 or more kids? That's got to be like the biggest puzzle in the world.
Well, I'm gonna keep it vague because I know there's a follow-up, but I'm gonna say this. First of all, that question in of itself, if you just take it there, right? An athletic director, we have 4,650 students, right? We have every IHSA sport except for badminton and gymnastics, but we also have 16-inch softball, which is a CPS sport, right? Then we also have club teams, hockey, rugby, right? So like we have roughly 2,000 student athletes. But in addition to being the athletic director, I also taught in the English department, and I was the head boys basketball coach. So how was it? Truthfully, if I'm being honest, my flame burned out a little bit. That's why I'm not doing it. And plus, I have 3 young kids here, banging on the door next door right now. So it was a lot. It was as much as I love Lane and pouring into the place that I love, it was just too much. It got to a place where I wasn't enjoying waking up and getting to work every day. And I loved every second of Lane up until really the past few years, but it just got to be too much. And I think, honestly, asking anybody to do that much, you're going to get burnout, and there's going to be things that fall through the cracks. And I'm a super competitive person, and I wouldn't let myself not do it for a very long time. I went for a full 6 years doing it with all of that. And inevitably things were not getting the attention they deserved around me. So I had to make the decision to step down. So
I have just before I get into the other part, I was going to ask, I'm just thinking logistically from scheduling with all those sports you just said. And I've been to Lane. I'm playing there next week in the shootout, but
yep.
How do you even go about scheduling that? Big calendars? Like, how does that even occur? It's just fascinating.
Well, I'll tell you, it's again, labor of love. I don't really have the right answer because I'm not doing it anymore. We did it the way we saw it best. I had an amazing assistant athletic director with me, Jane Millsap, who helped me run the show for 6 years, and then she stepped down before I did, trying to find her balance, work-life balance, and then a guy named Brent Bradish stepped in, and now he's the athletic director. And in his time, now that he took over, this is his first year, CPS finally freed up the AD of teaching. So he doesn't have a full workload, and he's not coaching, which is the way it should be, truthfully, right? So I think it's getting the attention it deserves. There's now an assistant principal over athletics. There's the AD, right? He has 2 assistants and he's not teaching, right? Or coaching. And truthfully, with any school, that's how it should be. With a school our size, with everything going on, that's how it should be. But scheduling was a nightmare. And further, a lot of people see Lane, we have this beautiful, we have a huge castle of a building. The football field's adjacent to it. We got Kerry Woodcups Field. But what people don't understand is that the Lane Stadium is owned by Chicago Public Schools. We don't own it or operate it. So we don't have full reign on that. So like in the fall and in the spring, think about scheduling. Well, we have in the fall, we have 2 big programs with football and boys soccer that need that space. And then in the spring, we got girls soccer, we got boys lacrosse, girls lacrosse, right? And I'm missing another one, but we have a boys and girls track, right? And we don't get to operate it. So I can't just schedule it how I want. I want to schedule it, and then I have to go to the people above me at CPS to get everything approved. And then inevitably CPS schedules games there for non-CPS schools. Every day there's games. So we have to work around them. So even scheduling in and of itself is extremely hard. Yeah. And then none of it gets approved and you have to redo it. And again, I can write a book. I think I could really write a book about it, but I'm going to stop. And it's a lot. It's a lot.
I have a headache as you were talking about that. And then we've asked a few, we've had a few coaches that have coached in the public league. Obviously, you kind of just documented some of the challenges, and we could go into some of the challenges of coaching in the public league, but what are some of the rewards of coaching in the public league that, maybe some coaches that, coach out in the suburbs or coach in the Catholic schools or the private schools? What are some of those rewards that you just get in the public league?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that's why I'm still doing what I do, because there are countless rewards. I think personally for me, like I'm answering as Nick LoGalbo. I'm not trying to give a blanket answer how a lot of people would answer it. I'm a product of Chicago Public Schools. I think that being an inner city Chicago kid has made me the man that I am. I think truthfully, there's a toughness and a resiliency that comes with being someone who has to, go through just being a city kid. I think there's a lot that comes with that. I think Lane is a really special place. I think it's a unique situation within the Chicago Public Schools framework where you have the high academics, but you also have this monstrous campus, and you have such a diverse community. I think that's one of the big rewards. I just think about me as the man I am today. I went from a small Catholic grade school. I went to St. Helens, like I said, Coach K, where it was predominantly white. It was Ukrainian and Polish mostly. There were some Hispanic kids in the class, right? But I got to Lane, and it was a melting pot, right? And I just learned a lot about life, not just a melting pot in terms of like race and ethnicity, but a melting pot in terms of socioeconomic background. And with Lane, you could test into the school you have to test to get in. Over 10,000 kids take the test, the selective enrollment test every year. So we're talking about kids from every corner of our city coming to school in one place. And think about, like, I was taught English for 18 years. Think about that English classroom. Think about us reading Shakespeare and trying to pull out segments of this text and sharing our personal thoughts from all of our varied perspectives. Like, man, unique. It's very different. So I think that's one of the huge rewards, is that we don't all look the same. We don't all talk the same. We don't all think the same. And that's the way the real world works. And we need to be open-minded and learn from each other. So I think that's one of the huge ones for me. Number 2, I think obviously when you see, obviously in being a product of Chicago Public Schools, you're going to have some kids who are less fortunate. You are going to have some kids who are going through things that other districts aren't dealing with, right? Just literally having food and clothes, right? Getting enough sleep. Mom and dad are working, or it's mom or whatever. Like, and again, you're going to have that anywhere. I'm not trying to say it's just unique to public schools, but that happens. And we see those kids figure it out and overcome those obstacles. And we a big Ryan Holiday guy. I don't know if you guys read Ryan Holiday at all. Obstacle is the Way and all of his books, but I'm very big into that stoicism stuff and like figuring out a way to get through it anyway. Life's going to deal you a deck, and you're going to have to make do. And I think that's one of the really cool things about being a CPS guy, is that you help give kids the questions for them to find the answers, to figure it out. And that's another big plus. I can go on and on with the rewards, but I'm going to pump the brakes on it there.
All right, so let's go a little bit more X and O's here, and I want to talk in terms of 3-on-3. Obviously, you mentioned you're coaching high level athletes, and when they get into games, they have sets and things, a lot of more things they can do. But
Yep.
what are some of your favorite actions and things that came out of 3-on-3 that you like to apply to your offense, and that like even maybe middle school,
Yeah.
high school teams can run because we all know, the higher level you get up, the more you're capable of doing, the more time you have to work on it. But at a lot of times at high school, it's a struggle to try to either get the time or be consistent with it. So what are some of those 3-on-3 actions that you feel like are really, really good and work really well for you and maybe just teams in general?
Well, I hope no one we're playing next week's listening. We got, honestly, a lot of the stuff we do out of horns now in the 5-on-5 side is stuff that we tailored to our 3-on-3. Simple stuff like just elbow entry, get a flare screen, like the point guard makes the entry, right? We get a flare screen off of that, but that isolates that elbow, right? So like on the women's side, Michaela Williams, who's the 3-on-3 player of the year, she's the #1 recruit in the country going to LSU. Like, honestly, nobody could stop her at that elbow. Like, she reverse pivoted, and if you gave her room, she was just drilling that jumper. And if you got up in her, she was ripping through and getting to the rim. I mean, it was like our go-to action whenever we needed a bucket, and everyone knew it, and nobody could do anything about it. So we actually run some of that stuff where we'll empty out that corner, we'll get the elbow entry, flare the point guard off, and isolate that elbow. But then we'll do a lot of stuff where it's like get action into flares. It's so hard to guard, like elbow entry, fake the get action, or use the get action and then flare that initial guy off of the other elbow. Like, it's really, really hard to guard. And actually, I'm not going to lie to you, we stole that action from Estonia, because Estonia, the first year I coached 3-on-3 on the men's side, we played them in the first game of pool play. Now, that first year I coached 3-on-3 with the men, we're talking about I had 4 guys on that team that are probably NBA guys, 3 guys that this year are already projected top 15 in the draft, right? Grady Dick at Kansas, Keontae George at Baylor, and Kyle Filipowski at Duke. Like, and we almost lost our first game because Estonia those guys are 3-on-3. They play it year round. They were all 6'4", and they could all shoot it. And they ran their action, boom, get action, flare, back screen. Like, they were just killing us. And we had to really dig down deep and win that game in the final minute, which it could have derailed the whole thing. You lose your first pool play game, you don't know how it's going to shake out, but we figured it out, and we end up seeing it in the gold medal game again. By the gold medal game, we had buttoned up our coverages, but man, is it hard to guard if you got a shooter and you got a guy who understands just IQ and spacing. So those are some of the things we do. We also just like simple stuff like just spacing and lifting everybody, and just understanding 2-man game, like dribble at, if you're overplayed, backdooring, if you're not using that DHO, and just understanding spacing and technique. I know it sounds really obvious, but like, I know that when I would have 2-man actions in before I coached 3-on-3, I was like, okay, go play 2-man, and we do it, and it was somewhat effective. But like now, when you do on 3-on-3 and you really get into understanding, like, hey, if that defender splits over the 3-point line, you're backdooring every time. Like, we've created signals, like just all that kind of stuff has just come naturally from the 3-on-3 side of it, now is applied to 5-on-5. So that's some of the stuff we do. And obviously, if you got a big, just figuring out how to cross screen and get that post entry, 3-on-3, it's impossible. You couldn't stop Kyle Filipowski, 7-footer. Like, no one could do anything with him. So we did a lot of things just to free him up with back screens into the post, cross screens into the post.
So we wanted to get in, and again, I am not a CPS coach, but I am in the same division in the IBCA as CPS. And, one thing I know that you and I have both sat in meetings just talking about how to connect the city of Chicago's coaches and the challenges that has, and because of the vast landscape and the different places. And so how do we continue to build those partnerships between coaches in the city? And should there be like a specific city of Chicago coaches organization? We'll start there.
Yeah, great question. We played Ignatius a week ago, and Matt and I started talking about it again before the game at Monroe, just about what we can continue to do. Some of the things, like, we actually were going to host one of the first IBCA satellite clinics at Lane. Literally, COVID hit and we had to shut it down. Yeah. And we had Rob and Ty and myself and a bunch of the city guys that were going to speak. I think there's a lot of reasons why there's some barriers, but I think there's a lot of room for growth. I think ultimately what happens, unfortunately, is that if you see some success in the city, you will try to move on to greener pastures, because it's so hard to be successful in the city unless you're at one of the elite powerhouse schools where, let me be honest, there's some schools that do recruit and get transfers and like they can sustain success because of the athletes they get in the building. But a lot of the inner city schools we face, like gyms, they don't have a weight room. They can't even practice with all three levels because they have one gym and it's used by both programs, right? Like there's just a lot of reasons you don't see sustained success by a coach in inner city Chicago, because once you see some success at a school, you usually move on, right? Maybe it's college or maybe it's a suburban school, but it happens a lot. And we've seen it a lot. And I can get into examples, but I'm just gonna stop there. I think that's one reason. I think the other thing is that like you said, it's just such a wide, vast landscape. Like city of Chicago, from north to south, east to west, there's just so many schools. And truthfully, I think a lot of coaches that don't know as much about it as they should, right? There hasn't been a great pipeline at their school. One coach goes, it's like a turnstile of coaches coming in. No one has laid the groundwork for them to understand, hey, I'm a new coach. I'm, mid-20s. Like, how do I learn more? How do I grow? Well, the IBCA, they offer these free clinics. Like, unfortunately, there's just not a lot of communication about it. So I think us, coaches that are in District 1 or coaches that are working with other city coaches have to be advocates, have to make sure that coaches know what's going on. Jim Tracy had a great one at, when was it? In early October. Rob Smith got inducted in the Hall of Fame. Simeon, this is last year. He was speaking. I spoke. We had some great coaches speak, and it wasn't super well attended. But I'll tell you what, there were some city coaches there. They made their way there. Some of them were new coaches, and man, were they attentive? Were they engaged? Did they ask questions? So like, it's definitely something I think has a lot of room to grow. And I think there are coaches who genuinely care, but I just think we need to have more opportunity in the city so they don't have to drive all the way out to the suburbs. So they know that they can get to this place pretty easily. And again, it's marketing, and it's just continuing to communicate.
All right, so wanted to jump in on the good work you're doing on gun violence prevention. Maybe give our listeners a little bit about what you've been doing and how they can get involved, and especially ones that live in Chicago. Anybody who grew up around here, even if you grew up in the suburbs, you're passionate about Chicago. We realize that there's a problem that we need to fix, not only in the city, but wherever we may be. So just kind of give us a little insight on that and how we can all get involved and try to make it a better place for all of us.
Yeah, no, it's bad. I mean, it's bad everywhere, right? Like it's an issue everywhere. I try not to get too political when I talk about this stuff because it's something near and dear to my heart. And I understand I'm somebody who tries not to get too political. I understand the landscape that we're in the past 5 to 10 years. It's just been very hot topic and people get turned off. But I think ultimately, no matter what we get into, like, we got to understand that this is a problem, that too many young people are dying and being injured. There are regulations that can be, no matter your political agenda or even your belief on the amendment, there are things that can be done to help curb the trend that we're seeing. We're the only country in the world that has this type of pandemic. We're the only country in the world that's dealing with this the way that it's happening in our country, right? And obviously it happens in different ways in our country, right? But in inner cities, communities specifically, it happens a lot. I think there's a lot of reasons, but I'll say this, I think being an inner city educator for almost 20 years now, and there are a myriad of things that go into it, right? But it's this cyclical thing, right? There's under-resourced communities, right? There are families without father figures or two-parent households, right? There are children who are going to schools and it's not school at all. It's a war zone in some communities, right? And it's like it's just getting home safely is the thing they're worried about the most, right? It's the thing they're not worried about their math test the next day. They're literally the most their day is consumed with, man, am I going to get home safe today, right? When my cousin was shot, it changed my life, obviously, in a very negative way, but it also opened up my blinders to a lot of things. And I'll never forget, I had a student in my class. I'm not going to name names or whatever, but this was back in 2014. But I had a student in my class, and again, Lane, inner city school. He was from Inglewood, right? The Inglewood neighborhood. We've heard about Inglewood. Derek Rose from Inglewood. And it's had a lot of bad rep over the years. But he talked about how, like, he's like, Mr. LoGalbo, we all feel for you, and we know how much pain you're going through, and we're really sorry. But he's like, and he didn't say it in a malicious way at all, but he's like, I just, maybe it helps you understand a little bit about what I'm going through as a young black male, every day, right? And I'm an inner city guy, right? But I'm also a white male in inner city Chicago. I was able and fortunate enough to go to a Catholic grammar school. We couldn't really afford Catholic high school. I would have been at St. Pat's, but I ended up getting into Lane, right? And I was very lucky to get into Lane. But there's so many things that go into being just being an inner city guy, but also just being a teenager, right? Like if you're not getting home, if you're worried about getting home safe, you're going to try to find safety, right? So obviously gang violence was such a thing for so long, right? And now it's branched off into a million other things and intricacies, right? So there's that. So obviously, I'm sorry, I get worked up, but there's obviously policy and laws, right? There's providing work and providing opportunity in underprivileged communities, right? There's leadership seminars and training for young men and women who are in really rough neighborhoods and just in Chicago in general, or in neighborhoods in general that could use it, right? We did Coaches United Against Violence. We had a bunch of inner city coaches get together, and we worked on bringing in different people from different communities and different leaders, right? We brought in members of the Chicago Police Department. We brought in coaches. We brought in former players. And I actually got Coach K to do a video, and he spoke to about 400 inner city basketball players about being leaders in your school and what that means. And being on the basketball team is a huge deal. You get to be a leader, and you could actually change somebody's life by maybe making a good decision one day and helping somebody through something, right? So like, again, there's a million things that we can get into. It's not a one-pronged answer. There's a million different things we have to look at. I give a lot of credit, Arnie Duncan, what he's doing in inner city Chicago right now with all his Emerson Collective, and just he's providing opportunities. He's providing resources, and he's someone we actually did gun violence rallies at Lane. He was one of the speakers I had as well, and I've learned a lot from him about what needs to be done. But there's always more, right? So I'm gonna pump the brakes there again. Sorry, it's a very heated topic for me, but there's a lot we can do.
Yeah, and I think it's just something that any of us are going to get heated about, and Todd and I can relate in where we are employed every day about getting to and from school. And I do think it's something Todd and I definitely wanted to speak to you about, because there are things, and I think we've seen this week with some things in the NFL, but there are sometimes just things that are bigger than basketball, that are bigger than coaching, that just need to be discussed. So before we move on, thank you for all that you've done in that area.
No. I appreciate that, but obviously, there's still so much more needs to be done, and I just recently talked to a coach of mine in our league, and he dealt with another shooting on his campus. And I'm not going to lie to you. What's really sad is so much of it, nobody hears about, nobody knows about, so there are a lot of things we need to do, but I appreciate you guys using your platform to bring up the discussion. Hopefully we can keep doing more.
So I wanted to kind of shift into an interesting topic, and Todd and I have talked to a lot of new head coaches, and we've heard a ton about establishing culture, a ton. Like almost every new coach we talked about is establish a culture. Yeah. But I wanted to hit on something new with you that we really haven't hit on with anybody else, and it's when you've been a head coach somewhere for a long time, how do you maintain the culture and that fight of, how do you continue the standards? It's real easy to turn it around. Well, not easy, but those steps later on about maintaining it, and then when the culture drops off a little bit, reviving it?
Yeah, man, that's such a good question. And honestly, I think you're scratching the surface on a topic that needs to be the focal point of more podcasts and more coaching clinics. I just recently reached out to a few people you've actually had on this podcast and guys that I consider mentors, and literally want to sit down and talk with them about this very topic, because it's like you said, it's one thing to take over and you're energized and you have all of your ideas and you're going into something new, right? Where you could just pour into it. But now what happens where, okay, hey, maybe you got it going and maybe you lose a lot of seniors. And this has happened to our program a couple of times, right? Like, it's, again, cyclical things. So now you need to, like, when you have people that have been in your program and they understand, like, I could share with you too. I've actually spoken to the coaches clinics, a coaches clinic for CPS over COVID about culture, right? And it's like, we have our pillars and our 4 C's and our standards and our mantras, and we have all these things that we say every day and that we talk about, and they're on our practice plans. We have all that. But what happens? We graduated 9 seniors last year, right? So there was a lot of things, like, we kept a lot of seniors. It was a COVID year. There was a lot of things going on, but we had 9 seniors. So last year, we're talking culture, right? Our seniors are able to perpetuate that culture. They're speaking the same language I'm speaking. They're finishing sentences for me. And again, I had a kid, the Malloy family. I'm sure, I mean, you probably have heard the Malloys. Megan's our head women's coach, but I had a gaggle of Malloys, right? They're the younger brothers were point guards for my program. I think I had a Malloy in my program for like 10 years, right? So it's like, when the youngest Malloy, Sean, just graduated, his older brother Michael was my point guard for 3 years, started as a sophomore, right? So Michael's getting chewed out every day. I'm pouring into him. I'm getting him to buy into our culture. And he was a big part of us getting ranked in the top 25 and beating ranked teams. Like, he was an unbelievable player. But Sean was, in middle school watching this every day and hearing his brother talk about it every day. And then Sean comes in as a freshman, and now he's just like a sponge, and he's able to, perpetuate that. And all of his buddies, right? And now they graduate, right? And now, like I said, we got 5 sophomores up on varsity. We got a junior who's getting offers, right? But they're not all immersed in it, right? Like a senior laden group is, right? And even the seniors that we have in this year's team, they're great and they're competing, but we really have one vocal senior, and the rest of them are more like try to lead by example type of guys. So your question is very, like, timely, because it's like, man, we've worked so long, and actually it's ebbs and flows, right? So I've been in Lane for 15 years as the head. And I feel like this is the 3rd time where we've hit this, not restart, but almost like you said, maybe re-energize the culture a little bit, because we're not necessarily, like, system stuff is changing. Obviously our players, our personnel is different. We're not in college. We can't recruit to a system. So our system's a little different, but our culture, the things we say is the same, but now it's getting this team to speak that language. It's getting this team to fight for each other. So a couple big things I'll say to it. I'll say maybe 3 or 4 bullet points here. Number 1, I think, and you say this and it's cliche, but it's culture. You fight for it every day, and it never, ever is just arrives. It's never there. When you think it's there, it's going to sweep out from under the rug, because you're going to have to re-energize it again, right? Your players are your culture. You as a coach are someone who is going to help perpetuate it, and you're going to lead it. But ultimately, real culture is when players take the lead. And I think because we're in high school or in college, players change every year, right? So it's never something that's done. It's always evolving. It's a completely dynamic thing. It's never static. So that's the one thing I'll say. Number 2, this is something actually a Snow Valley thing. Dave Bullwinkle, he's actually a scout for the Bulls, and he runs this business called Coaching On and Off the Court. And he and I really hit it off at Snow Valley. And I remember I got to go to one of the Bulls practices, and he and I just got to talking, and he does these leadership trainings. And I'm like, man, we would love to have you at Lane. So this was like the first time we hit this re-energized button for our culture. We had another team. We had some success the year before. It was 2014. We graduated a lot of guys that were pretty good. We played Simeon really tough in the city. We're feeling ourselves, but everyone graduated. So now I know it's like, oh man, how are we going to get this going? So Dave Bullwinkle comes in and he says, all right, Nick, we're going to do a leadership training, but before I lead your team, I need to know more about your culture. So he just sent me some guiding questions, right? what is your program's vision and mission statement? Like, like a business, right? Like you're the CEO, this is your business. What is your vision and mission that you let guide your program? And I'd be honest with you, I was a head coach now for 5-6 years, and I didn't have a vision statement articulated. I think I knew in my brain what I thought it was, but my players couldn't speak that sentence if I asked them, what is our vision statement? And it's like, think about any big business. And now I teach a sports communications class at Lane. So we study branding and we study like the successful businesses, right? Like I think about like IKEA, for example, right? They're thriving, right? As a business. And their vision statement is to make everyday living better for the many people. And I just fell in love with it. That has nothing to do with furniture. That's their vision, right? How they articulate that vision is their mission, and it has to do with building furniture, right? So like it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, man, here's let's develop our vision, right? To compete every day together as a family, or to reach our highest level of competitive greatness as a family, and do it together every day, right? Like that's our vision statement. And then you build into your mission statement, and then you build in your pillars, and then you build. And so I have all of this articulated. My players probably think I'm crazy because they don't have to talk about it nearly as much, but it's there, right? And that guides everything that we do, and nothing ever deviates. Now we may alter things from time to time as I evolve as a leader, as we bring in new coaches, as we get new players, things may tweak, but ultimately our foundation since 2014 has not deviated really very much. Right. So I think that's another great way you fight for culture every day is you can't really, you got to have some things that make you who you are. Right. And then I think I'll just say this last bullet point, like you got to know who you are as a program. I look at college. It's really helped me deal with the ups and downs of our season. Like I look at Creighton. I think they were 8-0. They're killing. They're top 25. And they go on a 6-game skid. What's changed, right? Their culture hasn't changed. Their players haven't changed. They have an unbelievable coach. They have great talent, but that's the game, right? That's why we show up and play it every day, right? That's why we do this. So I think at the end of the day, you as a program, you got to figure out, okay, what do you hang your hat on? Who are you as a program? And for us at Lane, we've learned, honestly, we don't have the talent that Whitney Young has. We don't have the talent that Simeon has. We don't have the talent that Kenwood has. We're not. We're a super high academic school. And we're going to be tough. So we say we're going to be tougher and smarter than everyone we play. And that's kind of become our DNA. So in our drills, we really try to make sure, look, everything we do has layers, has things you have to figure out. There's a time and score, but there's added components to it. We've got to be mentally tough and we've got to be smart, right? And I think that is something that's kind of permeated who we are. It's kind of helped us build a DNA, and we can hang our hats on that every day. Depending, our system will change, our players will change, but this is who we're going to be. So I think I've answered your question.
That was tremendous. So we're going to go same kind of question being at Lane, right? Now we're going to go X's and O's though. And you mentioned your X's and O's kind of change depending on who you have, right? You're not recruiting to your system, but I guess how do you go about deciding what to keep, deciding what to kind of get rid of? And maybe when do you know it's time to kind of, we got to look at something else here? Because I think that's a question not only year to year, but like even in your season, you have best intentions. You think, I think this is really good for X player. I think we can do this. And then all of a sudden you're like, whatever it is, you look at the analytics, you look at the numbers, like for me, for example, but you have synergy, you have all this stuff where you can look, well, that's not really working. And you have hard evidence to say, yeah, that's not going the way you want it to go. So what do we got to do here? So, when do you start looking at that and deciding what you're keeping and all those things?
Yeah. And it's funny, like we have a new head freshman coach this year, and my sophomore coach has been with us for a while, but he's in his third year as our head sophomore coach. And we had a lot of meetings this offseason, just the three of us as the head coaches of each respective level, about like making sure we're consistent across the board. So like our freshmen and sophomores of varsity are running a lot of the same stuff. So we don't have this, when freshmen become sophomores, certainly there's going to be nuances at each level, but you got to have some of your core stuff there. It's got to be consistent. So we got the whole playbook together. We got our sets in, this and that and everything. But now, our freshman coach is watching our game on Huddle, And he's like, man, you started 3 games in a row with the same set, but it's not in the playbook. Like, what set is that? And it's like, well, we threw that in because it's just a variation of something we were doing. Because look, at the end of the day, we have a sophomore big kid, like sophomore who's 6'6", 6'7" kid who's playing way above where, truthfully, where I thought he would be. He's been tremendous. So we had to start getting him some looks out of sets early to get him going, right? So that's just one of those little things we did to say, hey, look, here's a set we have. Let's add this wrinkle because we need to get this guy going. I think obviously all of us as coaches do that. That's the easy one when it's like, hey, we got a kid who's playing well. Let's get him some looks. But on the other side of it, when it's like, hey, man, I really thought this set would be great for X, Y, and Z, and we're just not getting anything off of it, right? Like we had this year, we had like a 1-4 high set where we're kind of swinging the wings and trying to get 2 guys into some side pick and roll stuff. And we just were never even really getting into it. I couldn't figure out what it was. And we just tweaked something in that set. And now we're getting to it, right? And I think at the end of the day, always having your antennas up and never being married to the play, I think that's the answer, right? Like, don't be married to it. Never be too proud. Like, I think us as coaches, sometimes we get like we got to show the players how much we know, right? Like, this is the sets we're going to run and this is what's going to work. Anything could work and anything cannot work, right? It's about your players. It's about them buying in. It's about getting chemistry. It's about getting timing. And sometimes you just got to like throw an audible. I think being adaptable is hallmark of a great coach. You can't be married to a system. And I think for me, truthfully, on the other side of the coin, though, I think sometimes when I see a team who's so good in their system, I sometimes wonder if we're missing the mark by not just like killing someone with the same stuff over and over, all 3 levels running the exact same thing. We obviously have a core of everything that we run, but we have sets at the varsity level that the lower levels aren't running, right? And I wonder sometimes if I'm missing the mark there, right? I don't know if there's a perfect answer for it, but I think to answer your question, staying adaptable, understanding when something's not working, maybe there's a wrinkle, or maybe there's just something you can do that's better. Maybe there's a better way to get into it, because at the end of the day, players score points. You got to get them in their sweet spots. You got to get them understanding, how to play off of each other. And ultimately, that's really what it comes down to. It's not about you as the coach. It's about getting your players to perform. So that's something I've really been learning the past 3-4 years or so. Like, it's not about my pride. Like, let it go. Let's figure out what works better, or sometimes it's just like, well, more reps. You don't need, you also don't need to like just change it after a week, because sometimes it's just reps and the chemistry clicks too. So not really an easy answer. I think it's very situational. So.
Well, I think both the last 2 questions we've asked you about maintaining culture and altering X's and O's, I think, as you said, I think if we had, a 10 coach roundtable here, I think it would be vastly different answers and vastly different ways for all of us to learn. So I think that's what made those 2 questions interesting. So as we get into our last 2 segments, the first one we call 30-second timeout. It's your opportunity to discuss anything you want about yourself or your family or your program, or something you want the listeners to know about, or turn the tables and ask Todd and I a question. Anything you want to talk about, the floor is yours.
Wow, that's great. Well, I will say, I think I'll say 2 things. Number one, and speaking to 2 guys too that have talked about family before we jumped on, I think being a coach and finding that work-life balance is really important. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you guys about how you do that. I think we want to be great fathers and great husbands and great sons and great uncles or whatever, but it's like being a coach demands a lot of our time in and out of season. So I don't know that I have the perfect sweet spot for that yet. I'm still trying to figure it out. So that's the first thing that I would, well, actually, I don't want to run. Let's start with that, man. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that.
All right, Todd, you got the kids. You go first.
And this is definitely more recently in the last couple of years. I was at Vider for a long time, a long commute and things like that. I just kind of decided, like, when I get home, as much when the kids are up, you kind of just put it away. I've been trying to involve my oldest in, like, we'll watch WNBA games, and when I'm doing stuff for the podcast, she's asking me questions and things like that. But involve them. But most of the time, it's just kind of put it off to the side, do it later, do it early in the morning. Easier said than done sometimes, right? When you have the scouting report due at midnight and you're like,
Right.
oh, what about this and what about that? But even something as simple as like I usually just have a notebook and I'll just write it down so I remember it, come back to it later. Because we all know we're sitting there at dinner and right, oh, what about this? It just pops into your head, right? You're like, oh wait, hang on, So just kind of try to write it down or even use my notes on my phone. Just put it real quick, put it back and go back and forth. Just kind of be where my feet are.
Exactly. Be where your feet are. Cause like things pop in your brain. You're just sitting at dinner and like, oh, but like I do that too. Just type it on my phone and I'll get back to it later, John, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that was very timely.
No, not at all. I think we all kind of do that. Sometimes I email myself and something. No, I would say, and coach, I'm actually going through when you mentioned grad school, I'm doing grad school right now. I'm finishing degree number 3 and done, but it is one of those things where in 2022, along with, everything else I have going, I took 8 classes and to try to balance all of that, so I would say it's a 2-pronged approach. I would say one, being very organized, I think helps me because it kind of takes out the kind of the fluff time of like, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now? And then to go off with something Todd said is I'm a much better thinker in the morning. So if I got to get up at 4:30, 5 o'clock and do my work, then I'm much more productive. I know. And I think so. The second part of it, I would say, is know yourself. I know if I start something at 8, 9, 10 PM, it's one, it's not going to be done well. And
Right.
2, it's going to be like, oh, this is on TV. Oh, this person wants to talk. Oh, this is going on. So I think it's the 2 things I would say are, one, be very organized. And one of my assistants loves to make fun of me and will say to people, he's anally organized. And then they're like, you're going to say that about him? And he's like, I'd say that to his face. And the second thing is, I think just know yourself and know when you could be productive and, at other times know that, hey, I'm not going to be productive right now. And actually, I would add a third thing is have people in your life that maybe aren't your family and friends that you can talk through some things with. I think, Todd and I are, with each other are both very good. Last night or 2 nights ago, we just talked for half an hour about nothing. And sometimes I think, or, we'll be on the road on the way home and, it's just a good 20 minutes to just vent about the game or vent about the practice or vent about what happened so that when you get home, that's done. Like you've moved on and you're done. So I would say those are 3 things.
That was really good. I'm actually, got that down right here on a little note. I think being where your feet are is huge, right? And what you said, like organizing, knowing when you're most productive, knowing yourself. Like when I try to do stuff at night and I'm like the super competitive, like I'm going to get it done and I'm staying up. And it's like, I've been on this one thing for an hour that will take me 2 minutes if I just wake up early and do it. You know what I mean? Before my kids get up, and I got to be better about that. And then, like you said, man, it's so crucial. Maybe we can develop that relationship too. Just having people to talk to. You know what I mean? Like so important. When it's not in your program or in your family, just somebody else to just vent. Love it. Those are really good. Really good.
Well, and
let's be honest, we're all getting older. We can't hang as much as we used to.
Yeah, right.
That too.
Staying up late is not a good thing for us.
Exactly.
But, I would also add just in something Todd and I have really learned from this podcast and developing these relationships is, when you have all these other coaching relationships, like I texted somebody that was on our show a couple months ago, and he actually spoke to our team, but then just running ideas off of them. Like last night I was frustrated about something and I brought it up to him and, he was like, bang, 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 here's ideas. And I think you become so clouded sometimes when it's your program and so frustrated and so emotional. And one of the statements he sent back to me was, don't let emotions get in the way of learning. And that kind of helped me readjust myself and think like, okay, yes, my emotions are clearly influencing my ability to learn or teach anything right now. So
that's, John, that is like literally like exactly what I needed to hear. Cause that's exactly where we're at right now. I've been so clouded and so emotional about this season. Like, and it sucks the joy, right? Like when you, like, it's just not clicking right at this moment. Right. But you got to stay the course. You got to keep showing up every day. It's the only way it's going to get there, and I think I needed to hear that. And that's kind of the other thing I was going to bring up was just like handling the ebbs and flows and the ups and downs. As long as I've been doing this, I still, we're all competitive. We all want to see our kids do well. We want to see our programs do well. And it's like, even if you win a game, you should have lost, but you won. You should be scrutinizing it and breaking it down, but you're not as critical because society tells you a win is a win, right? So, we're 3 possessions away from having 3 more wins and 3 less, like we're literally 3 possessions away from 3 more wins and 3 less losses, right? Like 2 buzzer beaters and a shot, we had to win a game. You know what I mean? It's like, if those 3 possessions go a different way, I'm probably a much happier person right now,
Well,
but
and I think something for the both of you, just while I'm thinking about it, and this is now maybe my new favorite 30-second timeout, but it's also just that when, as a coach, when you like you said, maybe you play an opponent that's not as good, and you want to celebrate with your team, but you also want to show them, maybe this wasn't the best version of ourselves, but then you have to find that line between, am I being too negative right now? Am I being overly positive right now? And I think it's just that line.
Yep. No, spot on, man. This is good. Therapeutic too.
All right, Coach. Last segment, quick hitters, rapid fire, random questions.
Oh boy.
The wheels fall off usually.
Yeah, this is where it gets fun. Your best or funny USA basketball story, a good experience, something fun that happened, whatever it may be.
Jeez, there's so many, man. Well, I'll tell you what, 3-on-3 stuff, getting to travel with a group of young men and women out of the country. And for some of them, it's the first time being in another country there. I mean, you could probably, figure out that there were just so many random crazy things that kind of happen with a bunch of 16, 17, 18-year-old kids who've never been on the country being in Debrecen, Hungary, this small town, and the first year we went, it was COVID. So we were stuck in our hotel room. So that, I would say that's to me, one of the funniest things that we had was that first night we get in Debrecen, the first year we're coaching this team. We're all about business. We're all, but like we've just trained for a week here in Chicago. We get to Debrecen after, essentially 2 days of travel or a day and a half of travel, whatever it is. And we get to the hotel room. We can't leave the hotel. We can't go into the town. And the meals for the teams aren't set up till the next day. So it's like, all right, what are we going to do with these kids for essentially a day and like a whole, like mid-afternoon to the next morning? So the coaching staff, that was Kelly Carruthers, she's at a school in Texas, Bowie High School. She and I were like, we created like this whole trivia night, like, and it got intense. And we had the men's team and the women's team, and we just got after each other, and we played too. But I'll never forget this. I actually had ruptured my Achilles tendon the 4 months prior, playing basketball with former players, talking smack. And I was still hobbling around pretty good. And Michaela, we were doing like a scene where they had to like impersonate. It was like why am I forgetting the name? You had to essentially guess who the person was being, and she got me, and she was just hobbling around, and everybody lost it, and then for the whole trip, like they were just making fun of me, so anyway, that was a big one for me for sure.
It is interesting when your players imitate you to see
Oh, yeah.
what they really hear and see.
Yeah.
So this actually kind of goes along with what we talked about in the 30-second timeout, but what is something, and for you, away from family, coaching, teaching, what's something you do just for yourself?
Yeah, I'm a very big, I think you see from behind me, I'm a big reader, podcast guy. And honestly, besides reading and podcasting, like honestly, my life is very, very simple. It's family time and basketball. And outside of that, I'm trying to read or podcast, work out or listen to music. Those are the things that kind of ground me. Obviously hanging out with friends when I can, and making sure I maintain the relationships. They're really important to me. I think as we all know, probably as we get older, our circles get smaller and smaller, but like, your A1s, your really important friends, you got to make sure you're making time for them too. But that's really it, man. Reading, podcasts, work out with some music, sitting in my yard listening to music with the kids while we're grilling. I do that a lot. I grill. I'm going to grill tonight. Like it doesn't matter the weather. I've grilled in, 40 below. I just enjoy that. But then obviously making time for friends. My good buddy Todd remembers Adam Hansen, best man at my wedding. I was the best man at his wedding, and he turns 40 this weekend. So we're all getting together, and we're going to get to hang out a little bit. So, I mean, that's the big one.
If that crew's getting together, that could be a good time.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Like you said, man, we can't hang like we used to. So we'll probably get together early afternoon and have a dinner and probably be home by 9. So
right. Exactly. All right, so maybe I guess we'll go weird or interesting thing about a school that's built in the 1930s, like a giant, right? Like you said, castle-looking school. I'm sure there's some interesting things.
Oh yeah. Well, so Lane's been around since 1908, but you're right, that campus since the 30s. So we're one of the oldest schools around. There's so many little nooks and crannies of that building. There's a whole basement that people don't really know about.
Hmm.
There's a lot of things, but I'll tell you this, it's not really funny. The coolest thing to me about our building that a lot of people, unless you went there, know about, like the building is this huge castle, and it's funny, like the classes are split up right down the middle of the school. It's really like a big A. I can't really do it with my hands. It's like a big A, right? And then in between that A, there's a memorial garden.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the most beautiful places in the city of Chicago. There's these sculptures and ponds and trees and people that have taught there. There's like memorials for them. There's bricks with people who have fought and served in our country that went to Lane there. Like if I honestly, there's been, especially in the AD days, when I needed to get away, I would literally just go sit out there away from everybody and just reflect and just make some time. That's one of the coolest things about the building. And then the other fun fact about Lane is the odds are on one side of the building, odd classes, and evens are on the other. So like your first day of school, you might have a class in 231 and your next period is 232, but it's on completely the other side of the school. And a lot of kids don't get that until a few weeks into the building. So that's always fun.
Yeah, it was just speaking of that garden, I remember last year when we were there, we had a classroom that just looked into it. And I kind of just sat there for a second at halftime when everyone walked out, and I kind of just looked around because, like you said, there's so many memorials. And is there a spot where there's like, I think it says Lane in the middle of it?
Yeah, the bushes carve out Lane.
Yeah. So that was just really cool.
Well, can I tell you one more quick story about
Yeah.
that's really messed up, actually? So when I was teaching core English, I would bring my English. This is actually kind of a really messed up story. I'm going to share it anyway. I was teaching something out there. I think we were reading, Romeo and Juliet, and we're all sitting around the pond, and it's spring and sunshine and birds are chirping, and like there are all these baby ducks in the pond, and I didn't know this, but like adult ducks will feed on I don't know what happened, but like the ducks got attacked. And it was traumatizing. All these freshman kids in my class were like screaming and crying. Like it was nuts. It was one of the scariest things I ever saw. We all ran back into the building. It was crazy. I don't know why that happened or how it happened, but I will never forget that. Talk about a teaching experience.
I was going to say that's not in the manual anywhere.
No.
All right. Fun one. Are you a breakfast, lunch, or dinner guy if you're only having one meal in a day?
Dinner all the way. Dinner, you break bread, you're with your family. Like I said, I grill all the time. I'm a big steak guy. So dinner all the way.
I was gonna say, so what's like your go-to thing you grill? Like if you were having people over, you want to show off, what are you grilling?
I'm getting some nice ribeyes. My wife and I do a lot. We grill everything. We get a lot of balsamic and olive oil. We get vegetables. We mix them up. We got like a little grill pan. So we got vegetables. We'll do some potatoes. But I'm a big steak guy. So that's kind of my go-to for sure. Obviously, birthday parties and stuff, we're doing burgers and dogs, but I'm a big steak guy.
All right. All-time player you'd like to coach in 3-on-3?
All time.
All time.
Anybody.
I mean, well, it's a really hard answer. Like I'm a Jordan. Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time. Michael Jordan, whatever, right? And I think his competitiveness. But I'll say this: like you got KD on 3-on-3. I don't think you're losing any games with his ability, because in 3-on-3, the 2 is to 1 is, like 2 is to 1 is 3 is to 2. It's double the point value, and you're playing to 21. Like if you try to cut KD out doing anything he wants to do, he's shooting a 2 over the top of you, and he shoots it with such proficiency. He can get to the rim. So KD's the answer, I think.
Coach LoGalbo, we can't thank you enough for joining us. For those of you that have never heard Coach LoGalbo, phenomenal resource, whether it's USA basketball or high school basketball or promoting the city or anything to do with basketball. We really encourage you guys to use the Coach LoGalbo as a resource. He's phenomenal to learn from.
I appreciate that and learn a lot from you guys too. I love your podcast, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast in concert with the Illinois Basketball Coaches Association. Please remember to give us a 5-star rating wherever you may listen. For more show content and upcoming episodes, follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout and subscribe to our podcast for upcoming episodes. Thank you for listening.